Welcome back to Liberating Generations podcast. I am Regan Clare, and this is my mother, Dr. Keesha Ewers. In this episode, we are going to explore the relationship between generational and personal trauma and your happiness set point. And as a doctor of chiropractic medicine student, one of my favorite subjects, bone health. Margie Bissinger is a physical therapist and integrative health coach who has over 25 years of experience helping people with osteoporosis and osteopenia improve their bone health through comprehensive approaches that utilize whole foods, exercise, supplements, mind body relaxation techniques, and happiness training. She has been teaching her patients happiness habits for over 30 years and has seen the powerful effects happiness has on chronic pain and recovery.
Oh my gosh. Margie, I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much for being here.
This is
Oh,
a
I'm so
really
glad to
important
be
subject.
here.
Yeah. So, on Liberating Generations, we talk about the many facets of intergenerational trauma with the understanding that everybody experiences trauma and it runs through each of us, kind of like rivers run into the ocean. And it's through our lineages and through our cultural training and our religious training and all of our stories. And these actually impact how we express our genetics far into generations that go beyond us. And they influence how we perceive the world and ourselves in it, and even how our bones grow and dissolve. And so I'd love to start with your own personal story of intergenerational trauma. You and I were together at an event just recently, staying in an Airbnb together. It was so much fun. And you talked a little bit about some of your story around this. And I thought it was really compelling.
Oh, okay. So I'll share. Do you want me to share my story or start with the traumas? Or would
Yeah,
you?
that's same thing, right?
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
my story that happened to me, and I guess how I reacted to it stems from how you brought up. So basically, I was always a glass half full person. I've always been a relatively happy person, even when my circumstances were not happy at all. And that's sort of what happened when I was in my early 20s. I got married. Life should have been so great. It should have been one of my happiest times, but it wasn't. It was really a horrible time because I found out day 2 of my honeymoon, the person I had married had been seeing someone else the entire relationship. Now, today's day and age, that couldn't happen, but back then there wasn't cell phones and we were in different parts of the country. So at that point, it wasn't a happy situation at all, and I tried to make things work out, but they didn't. So I ended up moving to a different area. I'm from New York, and I had moved cross country after getting married, but I moved to Chicago, and I'm working as a physical therapist with patients, and people are really unhappy. They have chronic neck, back, all these problems. And they're like, Margie, you're so happy. What's your secret? And then it hit me that even despite this really unfortunate situation, and it was awful, it was really like sick to my stomach feeling when I found this out. I mean, I didn't feel well at all, but I sort of was happy, and happiness was not based on your external circumstances. And what was it? But I was brought up like everyone's like, oh, shouldn't you kill him? What kind of revenge? I mean, that was sort of, and I had really wonderful parents and family, but that was sort of the mentality. Like,
An eye for an eye, tooth for a
they,
tooth. Yeah.
yes, they didn't want anything good to happen really because they felt, how could he have done this? And
Mhm.
I somehow, I don't know how, but I said, I have to forgive him. I have to break this. I'm not going to go on holding this my whole life with me. And so I did. And I didn't forgive because I condoned what he did. I didn't at all. I forgave because I realized I had to set myself free. I couldn't go on with holding this on that, what he did was so terrible and poor me and turn into a victim. I had to move beyond that. And I don't know what gave me the strength to do that. But sometimes when you're in these situations, you don't realize your inner strength. And so I did. And I truly just the forgiveness was such a big piece. And what happened then, I'm working with chronic pain, muscle spasms, all sorts of things. And I taught them about forgiveness, that you don't forgive for yourself. And it's like holding on to the cooties almost, when you're holding on to this. They always say not forgiving is like taking poison, expecting the other person to die. But that's really true. And so that was the most liberating thing that I ever did. And it liberated me that I could enjoy relationships. And I'm so grateful now. I have a wonderful relationship with my husband that would never, ever, ever have happened because I went to counseling. Also, I learned things, that I grew through that experience that I could, and the forgiveness piece let me be open and let me move on with my life. So teaching that, and I do that in everything I do. And a lot of times people stop at that piece. Oh, I can't do that. The wrong is just too much. I'm sorry, Margie, the wrong that this person did, I cannot. And then they're stuck. That keeps
Mm.
them stuck. And so I think it's one of the most, there's many liberating things, but for me, that forgiveness piece from that, which really was a trauma in my 20s that I'm grateful for. I look back as a blessing in disguise now. And yeah. So I think that I would say that was really liberating, and teaching the forgiveness piece and moving on with your life is just so huge. And I've taught that to my family because I don't want them being blamed, shame. I don't want them living that, yeah, just blame that person and hold on to that the rest of your life.
You said something really, well, a lot that was really important in there, Margie, but I want to circle back around to it and tag it. And that is the word condone. And when I conducted my healing unresolved trauma study in 2013, one of the interventions for low libido and women that didn't have sexual desire, for autoimmunity with pain, and some of these things that you're talking about, was forgiveness. And what I found is that there are barriers to forgiveness, and they're actually outlined in scientific research of why people refuse to forgive, and that they don't have a real clear understanding of what forgiveness actually is. And one of the reasons that people have a really difficult time forgiving is because they believe that they're letting the other person off the hook. Another reason is they believe that they will be re-traumatized by that person. Another reason is that they believe that justice should be served to this person, right? And the thing that you have to get to, if you're truly going to forgive in the way that you're talking about and liberate yourself from that poison, is to be able to separate the concept of forgiveness from reconciliation. And so people, like, they think they're condoning the behavior when it isn't. What you said was so beautiful, because you don't have to, and actually shouldn't, reconcile with a perpetrator that has harmed you. But you do have to forgive them if you're going to be healthy and move on. And so you can forgive the person and not condone the behavior, and have boundaries with the person that hurt you, right? And not let them back into your inner circle, unless that person, like, you can still reconcile and forgive if that's appropriate. I'm just kind of saying this to our audience so that they can understand the difference. If that person is a valuable relationship to you.
Mhm.
So if that's a very important relationship and you want to give it another effort, if they express contrition and sorrow and a desire to make up for what they did, like, have that dialogue, then you can actually start that process if you desire. But that difference between condoning behavior, reconciling, and forgiveness, I just wanted to bring that forward, because sometimes people do this thing I call pulpit forgiveness, where they sit in church, they hear that they're supposed to forgive, and so they say, well, I've forgiven them, right? And it's a very mental process. It's not a process where that, I think about it as like we've let the plug out of the open the drain in the bathtub, and really let resentment flow out, and replace it with gratitude and appreciation, which is exactly what you described you did. You said, okay, I can't go on like an eye for an eye, feeling vindictive, wanting revenge. Like, those things are the things, as you were saying, that you're digging two graves instead of one when that happens, right? So that was so beautifully shared. And I just really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, I just have to add one piece. So when I'm working with these chronic pain patients, and I started teaching different things, like for some people it would be just writing a forgiveness letter that you never sent, whatever method, just like you said, it can't just be, you really need to go through those feelings and figure it out. But then what did I see? All of a sudden, muscles relaxing and
Mhm.
chronic pain got better so much quicker than with just traditional physical therapy. It was really miraculous. And I saw what a big deal this affects your physical being. And, that was like 35 years ago. So I've been teaching these things. That's just one piece of it for so many years. But that's just such a powerful piece that keeps people stuck and keeps physical conditions, keeps perpetuating them actually.
Mhm.
Well, this is for another show, but I've definitely reversed rheumatoid arthritis in myself and 10 years later, breast cancer through forgiveness. So, forgiveness of another, from sexual abuse with the rheumatoid arthritis and forgiveness of self with breast cancer. So, both of them did not require drugs. I was able to
Mhm.
reverse them. So, this is a free intervention
Mhm.
and the most powerful one we can engage in, right?
Mhm.
This is so important. And that truly is liberating.
I
Absolutely.
I have a quick question for you. So it's simple enough to say just forgive, right? It's so easy to say that, but then I think oftentimes spiritual bypassing can come into play
Mm.
when that is someone's advice to you. It's like, okay, yeah, I should just forgive, forgive, forgive. But you mentioned writing forgiveness letters. That's a really great practice. Obviously, therapy, going through all of the emotions, really feeling them as they come up, not numbing, and like really sitting in the discomfort that comes up with, those emotions that
Like anger.
like anger.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're really stuck in that cycle of
Mhm.
like not forgiving someone. So I'm curious what other tools you might have for our listeners, besides, the obvious ones, therapy. And that I love that writing a forgiveness letter.
Okay, so it's a forgiveness letter. Then there's this type of meditation that I help people do where you actually have to look at the person through eyes of compassion. Like what's done, the wrong is already done. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it. But if you can sort of put yourself and put any compassion to what happened from their situation. That helps soften it. And then, just sort of there's like some, meditations that you can just sort of either listen to. There are certain forgiveness ones that help you walk through looking at it from the other person's eyes. But sometimes just putting any compassion, anything you can see from that person's perspective, that helps as well. So there's different meditations there's also something called Ho'oponopono,
Mm.
which
Mhm.
is a Hawaiian forgiveness practice that's really simple. I mean, it sounds sort of crazy, but it is very powerful. There's 4 sayings they say. "I'm sorry, please forgive me,
Mhm.
thank you, I love you." I'm not sure if that's the exact 4 the steps, but it's very simple, and you just keep saying that, and it just softens whatever had happened.
Mhm.
Um, some people have to use whatever techniques they need to in terms of tapping or whatever is relaxing to a person. But I think also, and also sometimes, is it true that I have to live like this? I'm a big believer in Byron Katie's
Mhm.
practice of questioning your thoughts. Is it true that, and if you just sort of, is it true? Is it absolutely true? And just like putting value on your beliefs that are just maybe so horrible that are not letting you through. So I think there's just many different ways, but the compassion piece really does ease it. If there's any room in your heart for any compassion on how that could have happened, that
Mhm.
might soften it. But so I think, you can look up the Ho'oponopono.
Mhm.
The letter I just love because when you're ready, you just start writing and you never send it, never get sent to the person, but you just write it. And writing and journaling is such a good way to just get things out of your system and out of your subconscious and just onto paper. And it's just so powerful, but many different techniques.
I love sometimes people will have a difficult time with, especially like in the Hawaiian practice, where it says, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I love that one. And for me, it bridges that place where I'm hurt. Why am I sorry? You hurt me,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And the compassion part, because if if we really dive deeply into self-inquiry with a lot of compassion for ourselves and curiosity, because we want to have compassion for others and ourselves, then we're going to find that in life we are the perpetrators and we are the victims,
Mhm.
and in different scenarios. I mean, how many people have we hurt unwittingly? I think about in India, I went to a Jain temple one time. It's a religion in India that's really based on compassion. And it's so sweet because a lot of the followers will put masks on so they don't inhale. Right now everyone's wearing masks, but at the time that I first learned this, no one was wearing masks in the Western world. And they put on masks so they don't inhale and potentially kill an insect. And some of them will even sweep the ground in front of them before they take a step so they don't kill anything. And, they're just so conscientious about that. And I thought, gosh, I just sort of blunder through life. I'm thinking about myself as the giant ox as I'm watching that and going, wow, that's such a level of self-awareness, right? That
Yeah.
I'm like stomping through the ground and I have no idea how many things I'm disrupting at that point as I'm moving through space. And then if you bring this to that idea that, oh, I'm sorry, and compassion, it says, I'm not just someone that's been hurt in this world. I have actually hurt, whether intentionally or unintentionally, how many thousands of beings by the time I die. And I'm not just talking about insects. And so, you think about like what a stray word here or there or a look it can do, where your motivation, your intention is not to wound, but it may land as a wounding thing. And so, I think that's like the bridge where we can say, oh, I can definitely have compassion where people have been, and if I can take out the behavior and just look at the person and them as another sentient being who is trying their best to be a human in this world. And let's face it, it's hard to be a
So
person.
hard.
So hard, and then we can go, okay, now I can muster compassion a lot more readily, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. 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 I'll never forget that. Like sweeping the
Mhm.
ground before you take a step. And then that feeling of, "Ah, I'm an American ox." Stomping through my world. With just- So anyway, I mean, you're a chiropractic student, and how would this be related to bones, you guys?
Oh, it's very related to bones. But I mean, the interesting thing is a lot of people who I see, they want to learn the exercises and they want to learn the nutrition,
Yeah.
all these things to improve your bones. But people don't realize that the emotional piece and stress majorly affects bones. The stress hormone cortisol actually increased cortisol reduces the osteoblasts, which are the bone building cells. And there's a direct relationship. And so it's really a part of everything I do when I work with people with bone health. They must figure out, must tune into this piece, in terms of reducing stress and reducing what's going on and, keeping them in the fight, flight, and freeze mode, as well as the happiness piece. They've done correlations showing that happier people have improved bone density, but it makes sense. When you're happier, you're also going to have less of the stress hormone and you're going to be more willing to engage in the behaviors that keep your bones strong. So it's sort of, a full
Mm,
circle of positivity that happens.
that's true. Self-care, is more readily available, the energy for it, when you're feeling contentment and equanimity rather than sadness, hurt, pain, anger, yeah, resentment. I know that I mean, a lot of our listeners probably don't know that chiropractic medicine is just not the same when you say that word. There are so many different variations of how to practice chiropractic medicine. And I know your big emphasis and what you're passionate about has been what Margie's talking about, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have a background in hypnotherapy, so I have that component of healing inner child trauma to heal our overall selves as adults, right? And so when I went to school to study chiropractic medicine, I was really after that physical component of how to facilitate healing in more of a physical way. And what I found there was, you know, subluxations are caused by thoughts, toxins, and traumas of which we are surrounded by on a daily basis. So it's not a matter of escaping thoughts, traumas, and toxins. It's a matter of how, when those things inevitably confront you, how you deal with them, how you process them within your system. Do you allow yourself to fully move through it, fully process it, or do they get stuck in your body? And, our bones are everything. It takes 10 years for bones to regenerate. And so when those traumas and toxins get stuck in our system, oftentimes because of the thoughts that we have, we're having negative thoughts, then our bones are expressing those traumas.
Mm.
So, yeah, that's something that I didn't realize I was going to learn in chiropractic school. That is like the biggest takeaway that I've had so far.
We have to back up and you need to define subluxation.
Yeah, so subluxation is basically when it's like when the two vertebrae are not stacked, they're not in alignment. So it's like it's an unalignment of the vertebrae, and we have thousands of subluxations in our system. So it goes beyond bones in BGI, which is biogeometric integration, which is a form of chiropractic medicine that I study. That actually goes into the fascia. So it goes as deep as the fascia in our system, where there are subluxations even there.
Mm.
And so if we're not, if we're not clearing those subluxations, then it severely affects our nervous system. We get stuck in fight or flight, our sympathetic nervous system. And so that's why I was so curious about the practices that you recommend to your clients. Because once again, it's not a matter of if you experience toxins and traumas and how your thoughts affects your nervous system. It's how you process it when those things come up.
Absolutely. And it's amazing. You'll see as your career continues,
Mhm.
that the big piece this plays, and that you must address this because, and once people do, just life becomes so much better. They heal so much quicker, and it's just really exciting. So I'm excited for you as you go on with your career because, starting with this piece and just starting with everything you've put together is wonderful.
Yeah, we
Mm,
sort of had
thank
to
you.
stumble on it. She's starting out with it. It's so cool.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So you talk about happiness set point. I know, the research literature talks about that. And so as you're working with people and osteopenia, osteoporosis can be reversed, do, does our happiness set point also shift while that's happening? I'm guessing yes. And I'm so curious about the mechanism that you've observed.
Well, what I see is a lot of people don't realize that we have a happiness set point, and everybody does. It's sort of like a thermostat where most people hover at a certain level. Like you may win the lottery, and for a year you're happier, but then the research has shown you go back to your regular. And same thing if something bad happens, you may be, unless you're like in extreme poverty, but for the most part, you may be a little unhappier, but then eventually we all go back. But the good news that science has shown is you can actually raise this happiness set point. And because most people think it's due to their circumstances, but only 10% is due to the circumstances. They
Mm.
found that 50% is genetics, and we know with epigenetics we can actually affect that, turn on and off genes, but 40% is from our habits. So we have so much control over this happiness set point. And so that's doesn't matter where you start because people are at different levels. Even if you're a glass half full person, everybody can raise their happiness set point. And that's the exciting thing, that by just learning different habits and, like the forgiveness or, there's so many different, the class I teach, there's 21 habits, but there's so many different habits that when we adopt them, it's amazing how we can just travel through life a little differently. But how it affects our bones is that when we, let's say we're looking at life as a victim, like one of the habits is, be a victor in life and not a victim. So, if you're in a victim by like blame, shaming, or complaining, and shame's just self-blame. But when you look at something and you're like, okay, and it's easy to do that, like, oh, poor me. But when you switch it around and become a victor in life and look at solutions instead of focusing on the problem, then you're empowered to make change. So the same situation, like with bones, oh, poor me. I just found out that I have osteoporosis. I'm going to fall. My whole life is shot to hell. You can go down that path. Or you could say, okay, I got this piece of information. What are my solutions? What can I do? So instead of focusing on the problem and being the victim, okay, this is the situation. What are my solutions? Well, let me see why I'm losing bone. Let's look at some root causes. Is there inflammation? And, am I not exercising? Am I a couch potato? Whatever it ends up being. But then you empower yourself to make those changes. And so then the mindset's so important because victimhood, you're really not going to get anywhere. If you keep going, and I've seen this time and time again as a physical therapist, oh, poor me, this hurts. If you just go on and on with that story, that keeps you stuck where you are. But to get to the next level, to become a victor in life and look at the solutions and start acting upon them, really miracles happen. And that's the best way. Your bones, that's what I always see when people, as I said before, there is always silver linings. And when somebody has that diagnosis, it's an opportunity to evaluate your life, see what areas you may not be addressing, nutrition, your diet, underlying, inflammation issues or traumas, underlying traumas, whatever it is, when you deal with it, then, everything gets better and your bones improve as well. So it's sort of, I think the happiness piece helps in so many ways, but just getting, so many different things that with negative thoughts, with everything. You can take one practice after another, but each one of them empowers you to do good things that ends up, as well as reducing the stress that is wearing and tearing down your bones as well.
You know, some of the things you're talking about that actually contribute to bone loss, I was thinking as I was listening to you, like they're popping in my head because this is what I do, is get to root cause for people. I'm thinking coffee is an intergenerational trauma, which
Mm.
leaches calcium from your bones. Like if you grew up watching your grandparent and your parent, and then yourself, and then teach your child that if you're tired, you pour yourself a cup of coffee, you have just perpetrated an intergenerational trauma that actually is very bad for your health and quite inflammatory. And I do genetic testing on all my patients. And I would say 100% of my patients that show up with autoimmune disease in my practice cannot metabolize caffeine, alcohol, and gluten and sugar. And that shows up in their genetics. And those are habits that we teach that go through generations and they cause trauma on the body, including on bone health.
Oh my gosh, and now that you're saying that, so I have an issue all the time because my mother-in-law who passed away was an amazing baker, amazing baker. And that was her love. That's what she did. When someone was sick, she would make something so delicious, completely full of sugar and not healthy. But that would be how she would express her love for this person. So it was a beautiful practice in that way. You're just doing something and you're being nice. But that's sugar. I'm an ex-sugar addict. I can't have any sugar. That's the worst thing for bones. It reduces it reduces, your absorption of calcium, magnesium. And it's so inflammatory. But now I have a husband who grew up with this, and he's a doctor, and he's gluten-free. So he makes, and we're very organic in this house, but that's what he grew up with. And that's to him his love language. So here, he's an OBGYN, these poor residents, they're up all night. And his love language is making something delicious, not terrible full of sugar. I mean, he makes it healthier, but it's still that same concept that he grew up with of sugar. So let's bring them cookies. When they answer a question correctly on rounds, he makes cookie rounds. He gives them a
Yeah.
cookie.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh gosh, here you're killing these people, but yet it's his way of like loving them up,
Right. Here's a lollipop. You are really good for your immunization to the little children, right? Or if you eat all your dinner, you get to have dessert. This is an intergenerational trauma that
It
we
really
perpetuate.
is, because that's
We're
what he grew up on.
perpetrators and perpetuators in it. Yeah, I
Exactly.
definitely perpetrated that on my
Absolutely.
Yeah, I came home from, I mean, from school, and one of my traumas is sexual abuse as at an elementary school when I was in 5th grade. And I would come home and my mom would have a freshly baked dessert
Mhm.
full of white flour, sugar, dairy. And that was like the smell of that when I walked through the door meant safety,
Mhm.
home. And that would be my after school snack. And if I ate on my dinner, I could have another piece of it. It's the same thing like your husband giving out a cookie for the right answer. It is the wrong messaging. And
Mhm.
yet we know how strong olfactory imprinting is and taste. And
Mhm.
then we start making those associations like safety, love, security. Is this
Mhm.
freshly baked bread smell or cookie smell, right? I mean, what real estate agents have
Yeah.
freshly baked cookies going to get people to buy so that it tags into their emotional response
Mhm.
system. I mean, my goodness. Yeah. So this is another intergenerational trauma. And it only just occurred to me while you were talking. I was
Yeah.
thinking, oh my gosh, this is one of the traumas I have instigated for my children because then
Mhm.
I carried that forward. And now we make them
Mhm.
sugar free, gluten free, dairy free. Yeah, the celebratory sweet thing is
Mhm.
still definitely present, and we all know we're sugar addicts, and so we stay away from it completely, and
Mhm.
are very very careful.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it did get imprinted.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, my mother-in-law, that's what I mean, unfortunately, she's not alive now, but she would come with all her different dyes, and it was such a big activity, and the kids
Mhm.
loved it because 'cause they'd make such unique cookies, and, there was so much love poured into it
Yes.
that it's
Yes.
so sad actually that something that has such a great intention is actually not healthy for you, and it
Mhm.
does perpetrate, this unhealthiness even though it's meant to be such a
Well, when we say
wonderful.
cookie baking grandma, that we immediately think of a very specific, warm, loving person.
Yeah. Yeah. So now it's like
Yeah.
massages, there's other treats, there's other
Yeah.
rewards, walking out. So, that's what I've tried to like help people when they get off sugar. Like there's other things that are just as good and just as wonderful. But yeah, it is generational.
Yeah, and I mean, I this is something I am really passionate about of just teaching the general society that just because you don't eat sugar or gluten or dairy doesn't mean you can't still eat amazing, delicious treats.
Mm,
That's what I mean, my Instagram page is Taste of Liberation, and that's literally all I do
amazing
there.
cook.
It's like creating these nostalgic recipes that we grew up with in a anti-inflammatory, healthy way where people who are pre-diabetic, people with autoimmune diseases, people experiencing anxiety, depression, inflammation, all of these things that have become just this norm in our society. It's like these symptoms of dis-ease have become so normalized, people are so used to it, and they just have accepted it as what is, rather than realizing that it's actually possible to not face those symptoms, to reverse those symptoms. One of those things simply being what we put in our mouths and still being able to enjoy these treats that we grew up with that have all of this positive uh connotation with, it's still very much possible. And so for listeners, if you feel like you're at the beginning of that journey where you're really trying to cut sugar out, cut these inflammatory things, you're learning, you're new, just know it is possible. And
Yeah.
it's actually a beautiful world once you're on the other side of it.
We
It's
sat devoured some of Reagan's Reese's peanut butter cups last night after dinner. They're delicious.
Sweetened with monk fruit, monk fruit, which is it's low on the glycemic index. It's not going to spike blood sugar levels. So it is possible.
Pure
Yeah, I have to
sugar
check
with
out.
no
I'm
erythritol.
Yeah, no erythritol.
you'll have to give me the site. That sounds fantastic. And,
Yes.
my daughter's dairy-free, gluten-free. So my husband he has learned some cardamom. I've given him some good recipes that are healthy, but he doesn't bring those to the residence.
Yeah.
Well, you have an event coming up and you've got some speakers and we're talking about this subject, in a far more depth than we have, bone health. And I'd love to hear what are some one of the things about running a summit that I think is so amazing is I like to know, summarizing, what are some of your favorite tidbits that you didn't already know that will pique people's interest, that there's more of this, where this came from?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I'm really excited about the summit because working with this for over 25 years, there's so many things that just aren't out there in conventional medicine. And that's the thing that I wanted people, excuse me, people to learn everything that they can do. So I think something that I thought was really important. And after the last summit, over 20 people found out that they needed surgery because the parathyroid gland, um, a lot of people, if you just look at your lab values, it will look normal. And you can have a parathyroid tumor that's taking the calcium out of your bones and really a major root cause of osteoporosis. And your lab work may be normal. It may not even show up as a red flag because conventional doctors, there's a wider range that will show up as normal because it doesn't take into account the different ages. So one of the things I learned that really anybody over 40, if on their calcium values is in the tens, 10 and over, there's a really good chance they have a parathyroid tumor. And over 20 people needed surgery last year. They
Wow.
found out in the summit. So actually, Dr. Diva Boone's talk is actually available now, even before I released it. There's 3 talks that come out right away, and I put her talk in because I just want as many people to learn this since it's so overlooked by conventional doctors. And I've seen this in my practice. I've seen this in even my husband after the summit last year because of what Diva Boone said, discovered in a 41-year-old a So I think that's a huge thing. I also think
Well, I wait,
so
hang on.
yeah.
How do you assess if you have a tumor?
Oh, okay. So if it's purely on the blood work, that's what's so unbelievable.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yes, and they're benign. It's not like it's cancerous or anything, but it has to the only treatment, and I'm big into natural approaches, that's the name of the summit. But this is the only condition where you actually have to have it surgically removed, and then you can do all the natural things. But
Mm,
if that's a tumor, you are never going, you'll just keep losing bone.
mm,
It's too over. So if your calcium level, if you're over 40 is high, now a lot of people think then your parathyroid also has to be out of whack. It doesn't, because if the parathyroid's not reacting, that's also a problem. I'm not going to go into all the details. It's
mhm,
sort of confusing. Um, but it's those 2 things. It's the calcium and the parathyroid. And yeah, so Dr. Diva Boone explains that. And I
mm.
think yeah, so that's something that's so important because if you miss that piece and it's missed too often, then I really believe people will you're not gonna get better. No matter what you do, it has to be taken care of. So I think that's really important, number 1. Number 2, I think I mean, I have 2 people doing cooking demonstrations on how to get protein into your diet, because that's also a piece that's missing. People, a lot of times protein got a bad rap. Oh, these high protein diets, you're going to leach calcium. But they found with the research that especially as people get older, you must have enough protein. And so, how do you get that in your diet? So I thought those 2 were so valuable. Dr. Irma Jennings has been working with osteoporosis for many years. So she did a whole demonstration. And Dr. Sally Lamont, who's a naturopathic physician, who has Dr. Sally's Kitchen. So there's like delicious, yummy recipes with getting protein into your diet as well. And I mean, there's just so many things I learned from the summit in terms of even the order of how you address things. Dr. Peter Kahn went into with autoimmunity because that's, as you know, Dr. Keesha, that's such a big deal
Mhm,
with bone health, but that the order matters. And if you don't have enough energy in your system, it's going to be very hard with the healing. So you need
yeah.
to address that piece. And I think all the exercises, I just a big believer. I like to give out, and your talk was great, by the way. I learned so much because I am not an Ayurvedic practitioner. So I learned a tremendous amount. Your talk was fantastic on looking at bone health from an Ayurvedic perspective. It was just amazing. So
Mm.
that was all new to me, quite honestly, because that's not how I view the world. Um, and Dr. Shiroko Sokich looks at the view from a Chinese medicine perspective. How can we integrate all those good pieces of Chinese medicine and
Mhm,
like the tapping and techniques? But I really wanted to give people as many tools as possible So I have the physical therapist actually demonstrating the exercises. So you learn the you learn exactly what you can do and what's not safe. And yeah, so there's just so much information and it's so exciting. And it's sort of like a smorgasbord. You pick and choose what you want, and even genetics. There's like what are the genes that actually can impact your bone health that you
Yes.
may not even know about. Some people have issues with vitamin D and they don't realize they have something, a genetic situation. And then you can address the you can actually make changes because of that. So yeah, there's just so many different talks on evaluation as well, because typical conventional medicine, what happens? You get a bone density
Yeah.
and your lab work and go on vitamin D, calcium, and possibly a medication and exercise, not telling you what exercise to do. That's unfortunately so. What are
Those
all the
medications
tests?
have so many bad side effects,
Mhm.
hormones. Like they're just ugh. So yeah. This is what's
Yeah.
the name of the summit?
Okay, so the summit it's called More Natural Approaches to Osteoporosis and Bone Health. And it's called More because we did one last year, and they're all new talks this year, though. I didn't want people who came last year not to come. So it's all, it's a continuation, and there's just, all aspects of evaluation, treatment, and, just all nutrition, exercise, and stress, all the different components. So
Yeah, in
yeah.
your last summit, I talked about the impact of trauma and how it impacts bone health and
Mhm.
absorption and resorption. Yeah. So you're very comprehensive in your approach to bone health, and it's so needed. And men have osteoporosis now. I send the men in my practice here locally to the women's radiology center because it's always been considered a female issue to have osteoporosis. But nowadays,
Mhm.
I send all of my men, and I find that, what? Over 50% of them come back osteopenic or osteoporotic. And
It
so,
makes
and
sense though, also, because you
Mhm.
also see a lot of people with autoimmune problems and different things. So yeah, I
Well,
mean,
it's the role of stress and trauma, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so the progesterone steal that we go through as females, the same thing's happening for men, but with testosterone. And testosterone is essential for bone health for men. And so many of them now are estrogen dominant and testosterone deficient for
Mm.
the same reasons we are seeing it for ourselves.
Mm.
So this is no longer a female problem. And I mean, I'm kind of standing on the walls of the city, kind of going, hey, everyone, men need to hear this too, please.
and the other thing
So
is all ages. So
yes.
Dr. Elisa Song, who's a pediatrician, is on, because that's where we have to start. We have to start with our kids.
Yes.
I mean, it's at every age. It's not when you get 65 and over or 50. That's not it. What you do when you're young is, before you have your peak bone at age 30 is when the most bone you're going to have. It's sort of like your bank.
Your
You're
bank
building,
account, yeah.
you're putting deposits in so that if you do lose a little as you age, there's no problem. So, what can we do with our kids? And so it's really every single age. And I think what's exciting to me is that, this message has to get out there, because as you said, it's in the United States, it's 1 in 2 women will have a fracture due to osteoporosis in their lifetime.
Mm.
And with men, it's 1 in 4 in the United States. And in the world, the United States is worse. In the world, it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men. But that's huge. And the consequences of these fractures are absolutely devastating and can just completely ruin your life. So
And
we
I would like
don't
to
want these.
say we consume more of the sugar, coffee, and alcohol in the world too, right? I mean, and then also our definition of success is very materialistic and productivity oriented. And so we're just feeding this weird hamster wheel, like this weird machine that's leaving us with an empty bank account when we really need it. Yeah.
So true.
Well, Margie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. This has been a fantastic discussion, and it went places that we never knew, right?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's
Oh,
such a joy.
it's such a pleasure being with you. And I love the work both of you are doing together, combining the two, your both of your brilliance is so wonderful. So I'm just so happy to be here and share this with you. And I love all the things you contributed. So thank you so
Oh,
much for having me.
Thank you.
thank
And
you.
everyone will have the link for registering for Margie's Bone Health event with our show notes. All right, everyone, until next time, be well.